Welcome to Dissent or Concur. Today we're going to be discussing freedom of speech, why it is an extremely important human right, constitutional right that we have as Americans, why it's something that must be protected, and also what are the historical challenges that free speech has gone through that has really cemented the importance of free speech from all sides, all people, and all Americans. So, your First Amendment right: Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof, or abridging the freedom of speech, or the press, or the right of the people peacefully to assemble and to petition. Let me get the full. I know it's not the whole thing. Right of the people to peacefully assemble and to petition the government for a redress or a grievance, some issue that they have, whatever it may be. But the most important thing about free speech is speech and your thoughts are connected. To have thought, you must also have speech. And to think critically, you must be able to express yourself verbally. This is why it's extremely important to master the art of communication, expand your language, etc., etc. Thomas Jefferson, one of my favorite quotes by him: educate and inform the whole mass of people. They are the only sure reliance for the preservation of our liberty. This quote here illustrates a couple key points. One, that free speech and being able to inform people is necessary. Are you really informed if you're not able to hear all perspectives? Are you truly consenting to something if you only have one source of information versus having multiple sources of information, multiple streams of speeches from different individuals to give you their arguments, give you their perspective? Then you can come to a strong conclusion, and then you can consent of what you believe is the right thing to do, is the right thing to vote for, is the right person to vote for, the right belief to have, the right cultural norms to tolerate, what you ought to tolerate, what you ought not to tolerate, what systems to be into. It could be anything. But you must have the ability to express. Free speech means free expression of ideas. New, old, good, bad, whatever it is. Because whenever you create, innovate, like I noticed with this with artists and innovators, they may have 99% of concepts and ideas that are new and fresh, that are garbage, that don't work, that fail, that the market doesn't like. This is the same thing with ideas and concepts. But there could be 1% of new things that are created that make great changes within the culture, the market, the country, etc., etc. That's the same. That's similar to the expression of your speech. To have free speech is to allow for new things to happen, to allow for innovation, new concepts, to challenge old traditions, to challenge old beliefs, to challenge immoral things. The First Amendment allowed for black folks in the South to formally express their grievances and issues of blatant discrimination and racism They needed that. And if we didn't have the First Amendment, black folks would be silenced. And the idea of we are equal, we are the same as white folks, there is no difference. This old way of thinking of discriminating against people by their skin color and thinking that your skin color defines you, that black people are a lesser race, that black people are not worthy of freedom, right? Being able to express and fight for that and persuade people to hear your perspective, that wouldn't have been allowed if it wasn't for the First Amendment, for free speech. Because one of the paradigm shifts that I noticed from that timeline of the abolishment of slavery, Frederick Douglass, Booker T. Washington, W.E.B. Du Bois, etc., all these black intellectuals, is once we start seeing blacks, Negroes, African Americans, whatever you want to call them, get educated, black Americans getting educated, becoming well-spoken, dressing well, critically thinking, able to truly debate and have strong arguments and fight for their people. This is when you start to see people buy into this new idea that black folks can be civilized, that black people are not different, they're not animals, they're not property. There is value in black people. But this is why, when Thomas Jefferson, you must educate and inform the whole mass of people. The utter importance of educating your people, yourself, the general mass of people, is extremely important. Free speech not only educates, but it eradicates ignorance. It eradicates bad ideas. It dismantles them. It debunks lies. Anyways, I'm gonna do a quick. This video here, I actually recommend people check it out. Free to Choose Network. It's on YouTube, and they talk about free to speak, thought police, etc. And it talks about the importance of First Amendment. Talks about how other countries don't have it, and how there's this new phenomenon of hate speech, and they're trying to legislate and regulate speech under the notion that they want to be polite and protect people's mental health and to not incite hatred, which hatred is a very obtuse, amorphous, subjective term that is a slippery slope. And these guys illustrate that if you give the government or whoever is in the government or in power the authority to legislate and control speech, then all they have to do is just get in power, and they're going to obviously suppress opposing views and ideas. We see this in North Korea. We see this in China. They constantly do not want an uprise of opposing opinion. They do not want absolute free speech or the same form of the First Amendment right of free speech that we have in America in those countries. Free speech is able to dismantle tyranny. It's able to expose tyranny. It's able to expose corruption in the system, in the government. That's part of educating and informing the masses, like Thomas Jefferson makes clear. Because that is how you preserve liberty. That is how you preserve your rights and freedoms. Whoever controls speech also controls thought. And whoever controls thought and speech is able to control people and mentally enslave them. All right, let's get to this video here. Hopefully it's loud enough. I gotta make some adjustments. Hold on, give me a sec.
more quickly and more often than ever before. In Germany, where the horrors of Nazism are far from forgotten, hate speech is strictly outlawed.
Well, here in Germany, officials are warning of a rise in far-right extremism.
Across Germany, there's been a 42% increase in violent crime by far-right extremists.
A suspected far-right terrorist has shot dead 11 people near Frankfurt.
A gunman targeting a synagogue on the holy day of Yom Kippur.
A frightening echo of Germany's past.
There is an actual threat where a lot of people are crying for somebody to go and do something, is then leading to somebody going and doing something.
Stefan Ernst was found guilty of shooting dead the politician in what's believed to be Germany's first far-right political assassination since World War II.
His address was published on the internet, and that is how his assassin found him.
There is an absolute radicalization through online communities.
In 2016, Annalena von Hodenburg co-founded Hate Aid to push back against a rising tide of online hate.
Free speech stops where your personality rights are violently evaded. We think it's very, very important to enable people to get justice.
Hate speech is prohibited under the German Criminal Code. Section 130 of the German Criminal Code basically penalizes incitement of hatred, racial hatred, national hatred, religious hatred, or ethnic minorities.
German law criminalizes a range of speech on the rationale that it undermines human dignity.
Laws on hate speech and humiliation and insult are not about protecting feelings. It's upholding everybody's humanity, everybody's status as a person in society. And in that sense, it goes back to Nazi Germany, where certain groups of people, particularly Jewish people, were denied to be human.
We never want this to happen again. Then you won't have any freedom of speech anymore.
German statutes outlaw the public display of Nazi symbols and the support of Nazi ideology.
Swastika? Propaganda material? No. If you want to say the Holocaust never happened, sorry, it's not allowed to say it here.
Certain organizations can't be formed, certain speech can't be heard, but that is in the name of preserving democratic order. Hate speech is a tool for exclusion, a tool for humiliation, which excludes some members of society who are thereby silenced. If activity is capable of inciting racial hatred, we are not going to wait until it actually happens or until it's likely to happen. We are saying already at that point that it shall be prohibited.
United States law takes a different approach.
The core principle of the First Amendment is that the government cannot restrict the expression of a point of view unless extraordinarily grave circumstances exist. The fact that it would, in fact, create grave harm down the road, not good enough.
This principle is the result of a landmark 1969 Supreme Court case which the court decided unanimously.
Brandenburg against Ohio truly recognizes that free speech means not freedom of thought and speech for those with whom we agree, but freedom of expression for the expression we hate.
Clarence Brandenburg was a vile Ku Klux Klan racist, as vile as they come.
In June of 1964, Clarence Brandenburg held a small KKK rally outside Cincinnati. He invited the local news to cover his speech.
He wanted to eradicate Jews, he wanted to eradicate blacks. He was saying the kind of stuff that, Hitler would have been comfortable to say. But he was just saying it. He didn't do anything.
The First Amendment says that Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. The question is, what is the freedom of speech for the press? What does it include? Does it include hate speech? Does it include advocating violence? It doesn't mean everything. And that opened up this enormous puzzle.
Brandenburg was convicted of criminal syndicalism, or advocating violence. The ACLU appealed the decision and assigned the case to attorney Alan Brown, who had made a name for himself fighting censorship.
In the family, we all understood why my father took the case. For him, the issue was the principal, not the client. In fact, my father's office was interesting. One day I went in there, the Grand Wizard of the Ohio Ku Klux Klan. He's sitting in the front office.
So make sure you guys really understand that he made a fascinating point, that they took the case because of principle, not necessarily because of the client. They were defending this guy's right, this KKK's member's right, to protest and express himself and talk about hating Jewish people, hating black people. You can look it up online of what specifically that he said, but the guy hated Jews, he hated black people, and all he was doing was verbally expressing that thought and opinion out loud. And it's an idea. Did a lot of people disagree with it? Absolutely. The question then becomes, should he be allowed to express those extreme ideas at that particular time? But let me put it this way. Extreme ideas doesn't automatically mean that it's always wrong. The time when people were fighting for the abolishment of slavery and to give black folks equal rights, at that particular timeline, that was an extreme idea that a lot of people wanted to silence. But obviously those people were correct. So it can work either way. Just because it's labeled an extremist idea or extremist speech or hate speech or whatever you want to call it, to shame it, to silence it, to slander the idea, it should still be heard.
Right next to the head of the Cincinnati Black Panther Party. Obviously, ideologically.
And to make a final point, again, these guys took the case in defense of the KKK guy to express himself and to not be in prison and to not be fined because he was wrongly imprisoned, because the Constitution says you cannot abridge freedom of expression, freedom of speech. So in this particular timeline, 1969, the people taking this case have to deal with that reality to say, listen, we just set precedents that we can arrest quote unquote extreme speech. We allowed the government to take away this individual's First Amendment right. And if the government can take away his First Amendment right, even though we disagree with it, what's stopping the government in the future of taking other people's rights that quote unquote is labeled extreme or they disagree with? So you do not want to give the government an inch to limit or suppress or fine you or imprison you because of speech. And that's why you'll notice as they continue with the story, that's what they were fighting for, that the government shall not have that right to suppress speech. They're willing to protect it so importantly that they're willing to go against and to support someone they disagree with as far as what they were expressing. And you'll notice here, I'll just let the video continue.
They were poles apart, but legally they had very similar issues.
The Ohio Supreme Court rejected Brandenburg's appeal. That set the stage for a constitutional battle at the U.S. Supreme Court. A 32-year-old African-American attorney, Eleanor Holmes Norton, signed on to the case.
Yeah, was I a black woman who was arguing for the rights of white men who wanted to get rid of everybody's speech they could think of.
Besides Eleanor Holmes Norton, the other lawyers that signed off besides my father were also Jewish. So he had not a single white Anglo-Saxon Protestant representing him.
I relished.
So the people that took on the case, they were protecting this guy, this KKK member that said he wanted to end Jews' life, hated black people, wanted to end Negroes' lives, and talk about white supremacy. The people that were willing to defend him when this case goes to the Supreme Court, were black people and Jewish individuals signing on to the case in support of saying that this guy can still express it. This violates his First Amendment right for free speech. That's how important the First Amendment is. That's how important the expression of speech is.
The opportunity to make the case for the First Amendment by arguing in behalf of people with whom I profoundly disagreed.
We were not defending their speech. We were resisting giving the government the power to decide that their speech could be banned. Because once you gave the government the power to decide that their speech could be banned, you also gave the government the power to decide that your speech could be banned.
During the oral argument before the Supreme Court, one exchange in particular highlighted this key concept.
The prosecutor was a guy named Leonard Kirshner, also Jewish. And Kirshner was arguing to the court, and I think he was looking particularly at Thurgood Marshall, and he said what Brandenburg did, it's as if he went into Harlem and started using the N-word.
Bury the Negro. Send them back to Black Africa.
You wouldn't last that long.
Probably so, Your Honor.
My father said, Your Honor, you realize your remark just violated Ohio's Criminal Syndicalism Act?
Justice Marshall, who is safe at the moment because the venue is in Washington, D.C., in Ohio, could be indicted for suggesting a violent reaction by the Negro community.
It made it so clear what was at stake was not Brandenburg, it was free speech.
The court overturned the conviction of a Ku Klux Klansman and declared Ohio's criminal syndicalism law unconstitutional. The ruling said a man cannot be punished merely for what he says if the words are not designed to incite lawlessness.
In Brandenburg, the court held for the first time, unequivocally, that an individual cannot be punished for speech that offends or might cause others to respond.
And not only is it shall we allow these bad ideas, quote unquote, whatever the bad idea is at that particular time. I guess we can use the example of this KKK member. If he genuinely feels that way so strongly that he wants to express it loudly, boldly, and tell people about it, that's part of him also needing to see the reaction, to see if people agree with him. And then he can assess it for himself if it's a good idea, if it's a valid idea or not. Then he can have debates and discussions with people with opposing views. This is why debate and discourse is needed for all ideas, not only for the person expressing these quote-unquote extreme hate speech ideas, but also for people themselves that may be thinking similar ideas without saying it, but at least they can affirm why they should not believe in these ideas that may pop into their head. If you don't allow people to be able to come to their own conclusion of why ideas are bad, why certain speech is bad and shouldn't be allowed, then people are not critically thinking. Then you're not fully respecting the free will and consent of not only the speaker to come to his conclusion after he has expressed his ideas, for allow him to correct himself and be wrong, but also the people listening to consent and see for themselves, is this idea valid or not? And then they can conclude, obviously so, this idea is not valid and shouldn't be taken seriously. But at least you allow the individuals and respect their free will and respect their ability to come to their own conclusion and consent. Are you really giving consent and allowing people to come to their own conclusion if they only hear one source of information versus a diverse market of ideas? That's the issue with controlling speech, no matter how extreme or not extreme it may be.
With violence, unless the speaker specifically intended to cause that, and was likely imminently to cause a grave harm.
It's not that you're afraid that it will lead to something. It is leading to something. It's imminent. It's present.
Whether you are racist or not, whether you agree with me or not, as long as it's only words, that's guaranteed by the First Amendment.
Exactly. And that is the difference between words being said and you acting on those words with action, physical action. Two totally different things. Which is why you must allow the conscious mind of people to hear and consume these words and allow people to express them as well. That's part of making people feel respected. That's part of people being able to vent. And instead of this anger boiling up, they can express their anger and grievances, because that's a healing process to express yourself. But again, the line is just in speech. That's the line that you have. If you have a bad idea and the idea doesn't spread and people don't buy into the idea, then you lost and you move on, and the better idea will win. So whoever has a better idea, they'll always win, which is who you should allow.
Brandenburg drew that line more clearly and better than any Supreme Court decision ever had before.
It is the eminent free speech case to this very day. Its understanding of free speech remains law.
Indeed, the current legal standard for deciding when government may restrict inflammatory speech is called the Brandenburg test.
My views have, if anything, hardened since then. As a member of the House of Representatives, I really have to be for free speech, because I hear people on the other side saying things I'd like to clobber them about, but they are entitled to their free speech.
What the genius of the First Amendment really has been is the understanding over time that either everybody has all these rights or nobody does.
When we grew up, we rarely heard what we would today call hate speech. Today, a kid growing up and goes on social media is going to hear it all the time.
People are going to read it and read it again, and then things that we wouldn't allow to say, would say, no, this is unacceptable, are all of a sudden acceptable. If you repeat it again and again, certain ideas, we are going to adopt it. And not only children or young people, but also you and me. This is something that we should not allow.
Saying it's not good if people are mean to each other is different than saying people aren't allowed to say mean things to each other. Because then the question is, what does it mean to say something mean to each other? That might not seem like such a controversial thing to begin with, right? People shouldn't say mean things to each other. Okay, who gets to decide? What's the punishment? And what does it mean to be mean?
European societies, including Germany, think that there is a compromise to be struck, that government can be entrusted to protect the rights of minorities through hate speech prohibitions.
And again, the people, this strips away the rights of the people to discuss these ideas by then giving the authority to the government to quote unquote play God and to dictate what they deem is quote unquote hate speech, offensive speech, non-respectable speech, whatever it may be. I'm going to tell you something right now. In America, I genuinely believe not everyone can live in America. And I'm going to tell you why. Because you have to have the mental capability, the mental faculties to tolerate bad ideas and to tolerate bad speech and realize, thank God, at least we are able to fully express ourselves without being fined, without being imprisoned, etc., etc. Because there are countries, and this video goes over that, there are countries like China and North Korea that just you saying anything that the government deems as wrong or hateful or rebelling against the government. Like, I can say whatever I want. We as Americans can say whatever we want about the federal government, about politicians, about parties, about anything. If you want to talk bad about LGBTQ and how it's a bad culture, bad concept, you can. If you want to talk about how Christianity is bad and outdated and it needs to be abolished and shouldn't be the standard, you can. If you want to talk about that secularism and atheism should be the standard and that's the new way forward for America, culturally speaking, then you can. These polar opposite dichotomies that we have, you want them to build up, and then you want them to then come together as far as debate and discussion, and then maybe coming to an agreement of concession, maybe finding a middle ground, right? Because we're always going to have extremes. But sometimes you can find a middle ground and you can find a happy median and you can find the ideal to where both sides can spit out the bad and come together with the good fruits of both sides, and then they can work in harmony together. That's the beauty of having opposing views at times. Sometimes it works that way, sometimes it doesn't. But I don't care what you believe. If you genuinely believe that me as a black man now, that I shouldn't be living in America, so be it. I will listen to you. But going back to the point that not all Americans, not all people can tolerate being Americans, because to be an American, you truly have to be able to tolerate all ideas. You have to be obsessed and loving of all ideas. You shouldn't be stuck in your old ways, because what the First Amendment implies and creates, culturally speaking, is that you should be open to receive and listen to all speech and all ideas, and then come to your conclusion to say, that's not good, that's not good, that's not the solution, that's not the solution. Oh, this sounds good, this sounds new, this sounds refreshing. Or you can even talk about what has not worked, old ideas that sounded good 50 years ago that are no longer valid, no longer useful, and you can talk badly about those ideas. Free speech allows for us to mold and bend to what is needed for the current times, for us to stay flexible and innovative and stay new, because there are certain things that worked 50 years ago, 100 years ago, but don't work now. Culturally speaking, systematically speaking, as far as the free market is speaking. But now we have advancements of technology, we have AI, all these new things that are arising. They may be good or bad. But because the times are changing, new ideas and new ways of functioning as humans is needed as well. So First Amendment allows for us to stay flexible and adaptive to the current times, the current needs for our specific timeline and specific circumstance that we're in right now. That's beautiful. That's why America stays in the forefront of advancements and innovations and new ideas, because we respect ideas. We want new ideas. We want fresh ideas. But we also have to realize that we then have to tolerate terrible ideas, failed ideas, terrible speech, etc. When I say ideas and speech are attached to the same thing. Let's continue here. There's a couple minutes left and I'll finish this video.
Whilst at the same time not abusing their power. It's not Germany that is unusual in prohibiting free speech, but the US is unusual in allowing it.
So countries have different histories, and there are values and lessons learned in different countries. When the Supreme Court first began interpreting the First Amendment, it upheld the convictions of all sorts of people who did nothing more than hand out leaflets criticizing World War I, on the ground that, well, that's not protected by the freedom of speech, because that speech is unpatriotic and the government is entitled to prohibit that speech. Nobody would say that today. That would be insane. You know, we were making it a crime to advocate communism 50 years ago. And we thought that was fine. We did horrible things. We've learned from our own mistakes that allowing censorship only allows more censorship.
If you want to give the government the power to ban hateful speech, you have to be willing to give people in power the right to decide what's hateful. And if you want to give that power, you have to imagine the people who don't like you exercising that power.
So, if we empower the government to censor speech, even with the best intentions, will the government abuse that power? Not necessarily.
I disagree with this Nadine later. She's way too optimistic, saying that not necessarily. Listen, you should always be cynical and skeptical of the government, the federal government. They have done great harm, historically speaking. You don't want to give them an inch. You don't want to assume they're good. And if you truly believe and have faith in these elite oligarchy of people in Washington, D.C., that we look at them now, they are so disconnected and do things constantly that are not representing what the people want. When you give that power and authority to a group of people in a certain location, that they themselves can then have more authority and say and power over you, that's when you must assume and not allow them, a small percentage of people, to tell the large percentage of people what they can and cannot do. Absolutely not. It should be an equal playing field, that amongst the people, we decide what we want, and not a group of rich elite people that are all well connected in DC deciding what they want. You never want to assume that they have good intentions and say, oh, with either side. Let me give you, if there's perspective from the right. Let's say the right says, yeah, sure, I'm okay with limiting free speech. And then the right says, well, as long as we have a Christian president, we have Christian Supreme Court justice, we have devout Christian attorney generals, and most people in Washington, D.C. are devout Christians, and they believe in God, and they are willing to suppress the speech of anything that goes, against my Christian views and Christian values. That shouldn't be allowed. Vice versa towards atheist seculars that think that Christianity should be abolished and Christianity is outdated. Let's say they say, yeah, I'm okay with people, the DC, Washington, the federal government limiting free speech as long as it says people that are atheists and people that all think exactly the same, and they want to abolish Christianity and they want to limit any type of speech that shames and disagrees with LGBTQ and this, that, and the third, and tries to take away abortion rights and all this different stuff. So do you see how you create this blind faith, blind trust that also suppresses and silences a group of people that don't think the same as you? So then you create this whole thing of luck of the draw and hope that your person gets in power, the people that think like you are in power, and they silence the people that think exactly like you. You don't want that type of system. That's the kind of system that we see in these places like Germany, that they give way too much power to the administration and the people that they elect. Way too much power. And it can create a scenario where it's the tyranny of the majority or the tyranny of the minority. We don't want any of that. We don't want any type of tyranny of any sort. We want to protect individual rights and realize that each individual should have the say of what they want, should have power within themselves to protect themselves. That's the checks and balances that we have in place that free speech allows. Anyways, hope this makes sense, guys. You guys take care. Peace out.